Good afternoon. I'm Ann Ilwood, Director of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Volpe National Transportation Systems Center. That's a mouthful. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the fourth event in DOT's Project Delivery Center of Excellence 8-part thought leadership series on delivering the benefits of the bipartisan infrastructure law. I'd like to thank those of you that are joining us for today's event on embedding equity in project delivery. I'd especially like to thank our two expert speakers who have joined us today to share their perspectives. Stephanie Wiggins, Chief Executive Officer of the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transit Authority, and Emanuela Myrtle, Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer with the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, usually known as SEPTA. Today, we will have a question and answer period following remarks by both speakers. Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box during the course of the session, and it would be helpful if you could also include your organization's name. At the launch of the new Project Delivery Center of Excellence in July, Secretary Pete Buttigieg remarked that now is the best chance, probably in our lifetimes, to transform our transportation systems for the better, to make communities safer, to make transportation cleaner, to advance equity, and to connect people to the resources, opportunities, and jobs that are going to shape their lives. At our last event several weeks ago, which focused on innovation in project delivery at the municipal level, San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria stated, "Now that the federal government has stepped up to provide communities with the funding to build these projects, we need to make sure that we're set up at the local level to successfully deploy that funding effectively and equitably." He went on to discuss San Diego's dedication to leveraging the historic opportunities presented by Bill to create a more equitable and transformed urban landscape. If you've missed any of our first three sessions, I encourage you to read the recaps and watch the videos on our website. And could someone at Volpe post the link in the Q&A? Today, we'll hear from two experienced transportation leaders that are working to move us toward a more equitable and inclusive transportation system. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Emanuela Myrtle, SEPTA's first ever Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. She brings a breadth of experience and perspectives from her work there and at a national transportation engineering design firm and the Georgia State DOT. Emanuela, thanks for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I have a short presentation that I would like to share with everyone. And I have to say that, while equity is the buzzword, it's not a new word. It just happens to become more critical in the conversations that we're having today. And when we speak about equity, we are speaking about the fair treatment of people and the full participation of all people, including populations of people who have historically been underestimated in the processes that take place around project design. And so just a few quick slides around what embedding equity could look like. This is probably not going to be a new conversation to most of you here today, but it's worth still having. Next slide, please. And so when I think about my career across the DOT, across the private sector, and now at SEPTA, it's become more and more critical that we define what equity goals look like, particularly from workplace to workplace, from project, from anything that we are considering that involves people. We need to be very strategic about clearly articulating what our equity goals and our objectives look like from the very beginning, understanding what the specific outcomes are that we are looking for, and just really questioning what can an equity goal look like and why should we consider these goals. When we think about our projects beyond the need and purpose of the project, we should be thinking about, and we should be thinking about what the impacts are to different groups of people. We should be thinking about what does, there's so many levels and layers of what can be mitigated, what can be prevented, what can be considered. And without having the right discussions with people, the right people, we won't get to equity goals. And we should not be the ones defining the equity goals alone. We should be encouraging our stakeholders and our stakeholders being internal and external so that we can figure out where should we focus those goals. Next slide. Training. Learning experiences around equity is going to become more and more important, particularly as we continue to go out into groups of communities that we are not accustomed to being part of. Providing training and education on equity and inclusion to a project team is so important, and that training should really include a lot of communication and a lot of learning around how we create relationships and how we approach projects with empathy. I think the word empathy is very important when we talk about the fact that we come together every day and we are designing, we are doing things, we are doing things that will change lives. And so the ability to come in and have empathy and create environments where we can have open dialogue and allow people to have the psychological safety to say what they need to say in part when we are talking about just the different things that a lot of us just don't know. There are a lot of perspectives to consider when we're talking about project planning and designing and equity. And so it's just really important for us to always think about those things that we've learned as young people in terms of sharing and caring. And we don't like to say words like sharing and caring in the construction space, but it's going to be, again, the world is changing, and the way that we approach how we do our jobs and how we involve people also needs to change when it comes to how we are approaching our work every day, right? And so that leads me to my next slide on diverse community outreach and stakeholder enrollment. I like to say enrollment more than engagement, because it's very important that we provide the opportunity for our stakeholders, our community members, to be part of the process and not merely just engage them and bring them awareness. I think when I think about the SEPTA space right now, when I think about the spaces that I've been in, one of the places where we really tend to sort of forget what in reach can look like. We forget that our employees are also part of the community. They are also stakeholders. The small businesses that we partner with, they are community, they are stakeholders. And the ability to create a community of practice with them where we're all focused on a set of issues or problems that we can collaborate on together. The ability to do that, the ability to create free flow, creative conversations around how we work together, creating platforms where we give our employees or we give our community members the ability to really digest the information that we're bringing to them, the ability to give them the space to come back to us and say, this works, this does not work, and the ability to create inclusive design and co-create or co-invent with our communities. These are the type of things that we need to be talking about when we think about project planning and designing. And these conversations need to continue to connect people in a way that they've not been connected before, particularly people who have been disenfranchised. We need to be thinking about how do we create cohesive designs that don't eliminate people with invisible disabilities or the barriers that we don't consider because we are not living in those spaces every day. There's a lot of opportunity for open communication, and those will be the way that we create projects that really serve everyone. And we know that everyone's not going to always agree, but the intentionality behind making sure that we are reaching out to people and meeting them where they are. Sometimes that means going to different places at different times in the day. I will say most recently I've been engaged on a culture tour with every single department, every single bus depot, every single garage within SEPTA. And while this is an internal initiative, it has forced me to step outside way beyond what I'm used to doing in terms of outreach which is really in reach in this case, and really getting feedback from our bus operators about bus revolution and the things that we're getting ready to do that are going to impact dozens of communities and impact multiple routes and modes of transportation here. And so we have to get very creative and crafty with the way that we are approaching our employees as well as our community members. Which brings me to our next slide. While we are doing all of this together, we are collecting data and we are analyzing that data. And the debate between qualitative data and quantitative data, I live in that space quite a bit because I'm really all about the qualitative data, but we need to be able to collect data on people, the demographics that we're impacting, and social factors that are relevant to our projects. And we need to use that data to inform the way that we make decisions, to help us be creative about the way that we make the decisions. But then at the same time, we need to consider what can an equity metric look like, right? We can sit down and develop measurable equity metrics and indicators to track progress throughout our project's lifestyle. So we need to continue to be flexible, listening to what the data is telling us so that we can create around the data and regularly assess what our project is if our project is achieving our equity goals. And I know that there are companies now that are putting together like equity assessment tools and just different ways of being able to identify where are we missing it, where are we not missing it, how are we doing. We need to utilize these tools so that we become better at this work that we're doing together. Next slide. So equity impact assessments. This is, again, something that I've seen done previously, and I'm watching how we are creating around this right now in SEPTA with all of the things that we have going on here, whether it's with our regional rail or with our bus revolution. We need to understand how creating our projects and talking about our projects creates different impacts and affects different communities and different groups in different ways, and identify what the disparities are and develop strategies to mitigate those impacts. And then when we talk about mitigation, again, do we have the right people in the room? Are we including the people that are being impacted? And if we have potential negative impacts that are identified, how do we develop strategy around them? Who are we bringing into the conversation? These conversations could very well change a project plan. And do we need to do additional research? Do we need to do additional outreach? What kind of interventions do we need to create, and how do we target those interventions? All of that comes from our equity assessments and how we go about using the information that we're getting, and continuing to change with that information as we get it. Next slide. It starts with you. Transparency and accountability. Very important. It is our responsibility as designers and project planners and leaders to really be transparent with every single person involved about project decisions. And again, that is not just with the project team. It's with the people who live in the community. It's with the people who work in our spaces, who frequent these communities. It's looking for outcomes together. It is having conversations that may be uncomfortable and bringing cultural humility to those conversations so that we can have enough accountability and just really think about, you know, if I'm thinking about the projects that we're proposing to our public, can I consider myself as part of this public? Can I put myself in their shoes? Can I put myself in the shoe of the single mom who has to get on the train and has to come down there with her stroller? Can I think about the senior citizen who has to get up on our bus or has to travel these roads that we are designing? Am I really thinking about who is this impacting and how is it impacting them? And am I bringing their voice to the table? Am I being honest about what the decisions are, or am I making the decisions and then I'm just bringing it to them and saying, this is what it is? Like the ability to build trust with our communities is very critical. And if we don't build that trust, we really can't create in a way that'll help our communities to flourish and sustain in the way that we want to. And this is why we're all in these jobs, because we want to create opportunities for our communities to do well. And this is the whole purpose of why we're here. Next slide, please. And so again, it goes back to that trust, right? So the ability to assess feedback and just really take the feedback the way that it comes to us, and not be afraid of what that feedback sounds like. How do we create platforms for various different groups of people to digest the information that we're bringing to them? At what time of the day are we bringing it to them? Are we aware of where they are? And are we thinking about how we need to bring that information? And when we think about the way that they're raising concerns, are we really getting back to them in a way that meets the questions that they're asking us? Are we really creating workshops that yield to inclusive design? Like, we have to, and it's not just a one and done. We don't just come one time and get your feedback and then run away with it and never come back. And sometimes that might mean that we need to build out our schedules in a very different way that gives us enough time so that we can continue to collect the information that we're looking for from our communities and our stakeholders. And so we have to think about how do we create projects and schedules, or how do we create schedules that allow us the time to garner this feedback and do something very meaningful and substantive with it, as opposed to rushing through a project and throwing away and compromising the trust that we need to build with our communities. Next slide. And lastly, I would say to create a culture of continuous learning and improvement, especially around equity. Again, this conversation is not going to go anywhere. It's going to become more and more important that we remain open to where this conversation continues to take us. There are a lot of things changing in our landscape these days, and so it's very important that we continue to develop and implement clear programs and put policies and guidelines that govern the way that we are coming to decisions and coming to actions, regularly thinking about the people that we're working with, bringing our communities into the classroom to give them understanding around how we're designing and get their understanding about how they're experiencing our designing. We want to encourage creativity as we do this. We don't want to just monitor for compliance. We want to mentor for creativity. We are talking about people, and we are all people. We are up and down. We agree, we disagree, but the ability to create open spaces that allow for real feedback and just learning and perspective sharing, we're going to have to continue to do that as we continue to build out and put things together on paper that become the thing that we're living in reality. And that is that. Thank you.
Thank you, Emanuela. I particularly like your distinction between mentoring and monitoring. I think that change of mindset can be tremendously important in executing these programs. It's now my pleasure to welcome Stephanie Wiggins, Chief Executive Officer at LA Metro and a lifelong trailblazer and champion of equity and inclusion. As many of you may know, Stephanie has been at the forefront of the equity conversation for many years. Please join me in welcoming her, the first woman and African-American woman to lead LA Metro. Stephanie?
Thank you, Anne, for that introduction, and everyone for joining us today. I'm really pleased to share this panel with Emanuela as well. I think there's a slideshow for me that's going to pop up in a second. Okay. I really appreciated hearing from Emanuela and really being reminded of the foundational principles of really what equity is. And so what I wanted to do with my time is really talk about how Metro has been putting equity into action. Next slide. So just a little table setting for For Metro and LA, we are one of the largest transit agencies in the country, and we have the nation's largest capital program in the transit industry. We also operate in a local economy that produces a huge amount of wealth, but also has tremendous challenges. LA is the gateway for global trade to North America with the continent's largest port complex. And our economy is one of the biggest wealth generators in the world, with the third largest metropolitan GDP, and the incredible fabric of cultures and ways of life we've woven in LA County have made it one of the most diverse and complex places, I think, on earth. We have over 10 million people and growing in our county. However, we also have the highest poverty rate in the state. So considerations around equity in transport are always top of mind. Next slide. Now, as you all know well, transit can be an excellent driver of economic and social equity, not only because it saves people time, reduces household costs, and connects people to jobs and opportunity, but also because these public investments can help build wealth and resilience in our communities if we take intentional and thoughtful action to build and operate them that way in true partnership with the people who live in those communities, as Emanuela was explaining. Now, that intentional and thoughtful action is not something we can just design and implement like we're reading from a blueprint. There's no set of plans that we can give you to do it well. It really needs to be custom built for your community. So with that said, I'm proud to be here today to talk about what's been working for Metro and what may work for your communities. Next slide. Now, though we may be one of the world's foremost wealth generators, it's critically important to me that all our residents in LA County, no matter where they live or where they start in life, that they have equitable access to everything that makes LA one of the greatest cities in the world. Not only that, I'm conscious of the fact that Southern California hasn't always been a beacon of equity. People who came before us made a lot of decisions in the past that have had disparate and inequitable impact on many of the people who live in the county. Now, those decisions manifested in a wide variety of ways, whether it be freeways that cut through and polluted neighborhoods, homes and businesses that were demolished or forced to close by construction, or simply a basic neglect of adequate transit services that really disconnected people from job opportunities. So that's part of the reason why at Metro, we've been digging into the decisions we're making related to the infrastructure we build and the program decisions we make. And we've been evaluating each and every one of them through our initiatives related to equity. Collectively, we're calling them our Metro Equity Platform, so that we do better in the choices we're making today on behalf of Angelenos. Next slide. So what is the Metro Equity Platform? Our platform is a policy that was passed by the Metro Board in 2018, and it's designed to inform, shape, and guide every facet of the agency's business on a continuing basis to shape projects, investments, and new initiatives. So I'm really glad that we have this because Emanuela talked about, again, these are some foundational and fundamental principles that need to exist. So for us, it's not a singular task or process that will be completed, but rather an agency commitment to incorporate equity into all facets of Metro's work and continuously pursue equitable outcomes in everything we do. There are 4 key pillars to our equity platform. Similar to Emanuela's presentation, we first define and measure, where we define equity in the context of the policy or activity and match it to performance metrics. Second pillar is listen and learn, where we undertake intentional efforts to establish real and meaningful connection with people in the communities we serve. The third is focus and deliver, where we implement those actions to carry out the platform. And the fourth is train and grow, where we establish a top to bottom commitment to understand, embrace, and maximize the advancement of equity. Next slide. One of the first activities we undertook as part of our equity platform was the initiation of equity evaluations on all of our board reports and actions by our board beginning in 2021. Now, to do this, we developed a rapid equity assessment, which is rather a simple 7-question tool that any department submitting a report to our board has to complete. And it asks things like, will the decision being made affect any of the following groups? Who will benefit and who will be harmed from the decision? And what's your strategy to mitigate any possible negative consequences of the decision? It also asks our staff to think about the geographies of the communities we serve. And so we've developed an equity-focused communities, or an EFC map, to help us identify where transportation needs are greatest in our county. So our EFC map considers the concentration of low-income households, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color residents, and households with no access to a car by the census tract. Now, these 3 variables are the base for what we call our Metro Equity Needs Index, or MENI, which identifies which census tracts are on the EFC map. We update every 3 years to ensure the data we're using is fresh, and these components, as well as our rapid equity assessments and the EFC geography, are part of every decision we put before our board, whether it's an expenditure or a policy decision. Next slide. So you may ask, how do these tools translate to project delivery? Well, we are empowered by our board not only to plan and deliver projects that benefit our EFCs, but to develop and implement programming that maximizes our project's positive impact on the people living within the EFCs, whether through the procurement process, through community engagement, though now, Emanuela, I'm going to say enrollment, or support programming that benefits the neighborhood businesses. So we have a lot of capital projects under construction, more than $22 billion worth. Not every one of them is being built in an EFC, but every one of them has equity investments baked into them. It's important to note that the bipartisan infrastructure law has really helped advance and maximize a number of those benefits for LA Metro and LA residents. Next slide. First, inclusive procurement. You know, our DBE and small business enterprise program goals have become more targeted and aggressive over the past few years. Our overall DBE program is 28% for the triennial period of the federal fiscal year through 24. And in FY22, we awarded over $22 million, or 24% of our DOT assisted contracts to DBE firms. And during the first semi-annual reporting period for this federal fiscal year, we reported 46% of our contracts awarded to DBEs. Now, our small business prime program is going strong, which sets aside a portion of our contracts for certified SBEs to bid as a prime contractor. And since its inception in 2014, Metro has awarded over $220 million to SB primes. It's really important because this is an opportunity to grow the technical capacity of our small businesses. And we support a small business bonding program to ensure that small businesses can access opportunities made only possible by IIJA investing in our mega projects. Next slide. A groundbreaking inclusive procurement strategy is our project labor agreement and construction careers policy. Now, we have long been dedicated to ensuring to the maximum extent possible that the construction workers who build these projects hail from all backgrounds and walks of life and come from the communities we serve. Now, we just celebrated our 11th anniversary of our PLA, which mandates at least 40% of all hours of project work shall be performed by national targeted workers. 20% of all project work hours come from apprentices, and 10% come from disadvantaged workers like returning veterans, the formerly incarcerated, or the formerly homeless. And we're proud to be performing work through BIL's pilot local hire initiative, which helps us ensure that local Angelenos get more of the jobs from the construction projects their tax dollars are paying for. The PLA and CCP have literally changed lives. We've applied it to more than 54 projects with a combined contract value of more than $10 billion. No work stoppages or lockouts have occurred since the start of the program. So we have hundreds of examples of people who have turned their lives and livelihoods around through our construction projects. And I'm happy to talk more about that in Q&A. Next slide. Now, LA County is home to more than 1 million small businesses. So what more can we do? Well, we pioneered what we like to call our trifecta of programs into one of our mega projects, the K-Line, which is a light rail project that goes through our historic Crenshaw neighborhoods all the way to Inglewood. And I'll preface this by saying that at the beginning, the K-Line had a lot of support, but a lot of people had a justifiable concern that the line would spur and accelerate gentrification in Crenshaw, Leimert Park, and Inglewood. And it was critically important that we reach out, talk to the community, and help them help us get it right. And in the end, because of our work, many project opponents became proponents. We did a lot of things to get that support, but some of the key tools we used to gain that support included our pioneering pilot business interruption fund, which compensates small mom and pop businesses directly affected by construction. We also have a business solution center, which provides small businesses in the corridor hands-on business assistance and access to a network of specialized support services. And we have a marketing program that we call Eat Shop Play that highlights businesses in the corridor during construction. Now, we opened our K-Line in October of last year, and I'm proud to say that even despite the pandemic, of those who received a grant, 80% of the small businesses in the corridor that were open at the start of construction 8 years earlier remained open at the end of construction. So they can also benefit from the infrastructure investment. And we've applied these programs to all IIJA funded projects. Next slide. Now, with almost 3 decades of transportation experience, I believe the most effective way to incorporate equity in the construction part of the project delivery process is through the procurement actions. And IIJA, through Justice 40, has inspired us to lean in even more. So we've developed what we call a cultural competency evaluation criteria. It's something we've started adding into our new mega project procurements, starting with our East San Fernando Valley Light Rail project. That's our latest mega project contract to seek federal funding through IIJA. The East San Fernando Valley Light Rail line will serve an area of persistent poverty, and it will serve a lot of people in our equity-focused communities, many of whom live in Spanish-speaking households. So it was important to us to take everything we learned on the K-Line and other projects and put it to use here on the East San Fernando Valley Line project. Now, as part of the procurement process for the prime progressive design build contract, I'm going to be very clear, the progressive design build contract, not an evaluation criteria for the community relations contract or the preliminary engineering contract, but for the largest dollar value of the transportation investment, the construction part, in this case, progressive design build contract, each proposer had to demonstrate a well-defined approach to ensure that cultural competency is considered and executed for all phases of their work. That included policies and practices at the organizational level, as well as values and behaviors at the individual level that enable cross-cultural interaction, dialogue, and shared power, tools to respond effectively to diverse environments, tools to enable trusting communications between the contractor team and the community. And Manuela, I think you'll appreciate that. And the proposers had to demonstrate an understanding of the community's lived experiences. Now, this cultural competency requirement was a big deal in our East San Fernando Valley procurement, and we've since added it to our Vermont Transit Corridor Bus Rapid Transit procurement, and we'll add it to other mega projects. Next slide. So as all of these programs and initiatives demonstrate, Metro's commitment to equity is central to everything we do, including project delivery. Now, we have a lot more work to do to ensure our agency delivers its projects and programs equitably, but we are dedicated to this work, and I think we're getting better every day. Of note, each of the initiatives I've shared today have saved time and money for our capital projects and helped us deliver more effectively our projects. I also invite you to visit our Equity Information Hub Take a look at those tools on the hub, see if they can be of use to you and your communities. And if they aren't exactly right, feel free to use what works and create something that works better for your agency and your community. Now, we're in an era where the gap between rich and poor has never been greater, and we're headed into an era where we know climate change is going to affect the poorest the most. We got here because of intentional policy choices, many of which ignored or concealed the impact on communities at the lowest rungs of the income distribution. Intentionality got us here, and intentionality is the only thing that can help lead us toward a brighter, cleaner, and more equitable future. One of my favorite quotes is by Arthur Chan, and I've provided it on this slide, and that is, diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, it's intentional. Inclusion is an action, and belonging is the outcome. Equity and inclusion advance the ultimate goal to ensure that the benefits of mobility belong to everyone, and we will have a better society because of it. So thank you, Anne and the Volpe Center, for the opportunity to address you today, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Stephanie, for giving us insight into Metro's equity platform and best practices. We'll now move right into the question and answer period. We have some really good questions. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but we'll do our best here. First question for Emanuela. You made an important distinction between engaging people in communities and enrolling them. That would seem to require changes both within SEPTA and potentially capacity building among affected stakeholders. Can you talk about one thing to change within SEPTA to move towards genuine enrollment, and whether SEPTA is also helping build capacity for individuals or communities to be enrolled in project delivery?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak again to our bus revolution effort that we are undertaking right now, which is looking at our bus routes that haven't really been analyzed or evaluated probably since the 1960s. And so there's a lot of heartache and heartburn about it because people are very used to what they're used to because this is the way it's always been. The ability to engage our bus operators and enroll them in how important this is and not just disrupting the way that they're used to driving the buses or the routes that they're typically used to traveling. And even as we change technology on our buses, we have had to do a very intentional, conscious job of really bringing in our operators to help us in terms of how do we communicate to the public. We don't just want to make these assumptions that just because we're the ones sitting behind the desk, that we have better ways of communicating, when it is in fact our bus operators who are interacting with our public every day. They see families, they see business owners, they see school children. They've become sort of these ambassadors for us, really, that sitting in an office, we're just not. And so thinking about how we conduct outreach inside and create that in-reach so that we can impact outreach in a very different way, we've had to really think about what does that look like. And so we've created focus groups for our bus operators. We are creating focus groups for different parts of the population that speak different languages. We have had to really think all the way outside of the box and not just leave it in the planning department to think about how do we go about executing what this is going to look like by the time this is done. And so we've had to really just think about how do we engage every single person in this authority, in this movement, because it's literally changing the way that SEPTA is known in this community over here and throughout Philadelphia. And so we have to think about who are we engaging? How are we engaging them? Do we actually care about what they have to say? Do we think we're better than them just because they're not designers or architects and all that good stuff? But do we really value their voice? And how do we help them know that we value their voice? And do we want to change everything because they have an opinion about it? No. But do we want to listen and really take into account what is being said to us? Yes. And so the art of engaging and enrolling, it's just critical. It's not just about yeah, you can't, we invited you to one meeting and you said what you needed to say. This has been a continual process, and it's going to continue to be that as we start to put out what different drafts of our bus routes are going to look like.
Thank you very much. Really great answer. Stephanie, we have a couple of questions about your comments on the cultural competency plan that I think we can roll together. First one is, do you find that DBs are able to compete at the same level as large contractors for the cultural competency plan? And second question is, how did you address the risk of receiving a limited number of proposals and or lower quality or higher price of technical proposals due to the cultural competency plan?
Let me take the last question first, because it's one that we typically get, but I'm proud to say we haven't experienced that. And in fact, to Manuela's point about the importance of doing the work internally, I did get pushback internally when I said we need to develop this criteria. And the pushback was exactly the question you shared from the audience. And, aren't you going to sacrifice quality? Aren't you going to limit the number of proposals? We've heard that time and time again, whether it's our PLA or even DBE program. And guess what, Anne? I'm proud to say that the private sector will step up. If the agency says it's important to them and we can explain what our intention is, they will step up. And we got more than 3 proposals for this progressive design build contract. All of the proposers addressed cultural competency. And I'm proud to say that the team that was the highest ranked in terms of technical qualifications was also the team that had the highest score for cultural competency. Of note, the second time we've just done it for the Vermont BRT corridor, again, got more than 3 proposals in. All but one addressed cultural competency. That affect their score. But no, this is not going to detract from competition. It's not going to increase the cost of the contract. And instead, we know that this is going to actually save us time on the schedule and save us money on the project. The first question was about small businesses and are they able to compete? Again, small businesses bring that kind of local, on the ground understanding of communities that actually help with their value proposition when they're teaming with larger firms on these types of projects. I don't think it's a barrier for small businesses to have cultural competency as an evaluation criteria.
Thank you.
Manuela, what do you think? Oh,
I totally agree with you.
okay.
So I think that's a myth that we need to put to bed today.
Yes, please, can we put it to bed?
So, Emmanuel, a couple of people have commented on your use of the term equity impact assessment and wonder what you consider to be the difference between equity impact assessment and community impact assessment. And is there a best practice for equity impact assessment?
Repeat that question one more time.
What's the difference, simplified, what's the difference between an equity impact assessment and a community impact assessment?
I don't really know that there is much of a difference.
I think they may be different terms for the same. I
think they are interchangeable. I think each of them require us to do some digging. I think each of them require us to get full understanding around who we're designing around and who we're designing with. I think each of them will demands that we consider things that we once upon a time ago did not when we were putting projects on paper. And so I would say they are very similar, if not the same. We just use the words a little differently, depending on, who you're talking to.
Sounds right to me. Stephanie, do you have a thought on that?
Yes, slightly different. I would say we like to say equity impact assessment, Emanuela, just so that we're clear that you also don't just focus on the current conditions in the community, but really make sure you're taking that historical look. And sometimes that can get lost. So it would be great if they could be interchangeable going forward, but we want to make sure we don't lose the history. And to your point, what often happens is we go out and want to talk to a community about a project, and we haven't taken stock of what that community's been living with for generations, and you've got to deal with that first. And that's why we tend to refer to equity impact assessments instead of community impact.
So recognizing that you both are working in large urban areas, nonetheless, we have several questions about equity in a rural environment. Specifically, what are some examples of ways that impoverished rural governments could incorporate equity in railroad safety construction projects? And then more generally, a lot of the fantastic things larger cities do are not feasible for rural and impoverished governments. Any thoughts to contribute, recognizing that neither of you is working in an impoverished or rural area at the moment?
I'm not in a rural area. It'd be interesting to understand why people think they don't have access to these tools, regardless of size. I would encourage people, if you're on the public agency side, to really reimagine your ability through your procurement process, right? And what you can be explicit about wanting your private sector partners to provide. It's amazing what the opportunity to be transformative with federal investment dollars can do to really be a game changer. And that's where I've seen the real change. It's not so much our size, it's when we actually put it in our procurement processes. So whether it's a rail safety project, whether it's any type of project, just regardless of the contract value, it's really, if you really believing in what I've believed after my few decades in this industry, that the private sector really wants to partner with you, and they want to understand what's important to the agency. And they're going to do everything they can in a competitive environment to demonstrate that they can deliver for you.
Thank you for that. And I guess I would also add that DOT's Project Delivery Center of Excellence, one of our goals is to identify what tools can be made available to rural and rural communities and smaller governments and smaller grantees. So any of you on the call who have thoughts about that, please feel free to reach out to us. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? So question, I guess, for either of you, how do we make transit employment easier for working mothers? How do we deal with seniority and evening/weekend where depots are far off the grid, hard to manage daycare?
Oh, that's a simple question.
If you could answer that question, we can just all go.
Yeah, we can just end it right now. Yeah.
Well, I mean, complete transparency, I am trying to figure that out right now. And how am I doing that? By going to the depots and our districts to talk to our moms. One of the initiatives we have been looking at here is how do we partner with different local childcare providers along our districts and our routes to provide either low cost, no cost childcare to new moms, existing moms who need that kind of help. And so this is something that we want to pilot soon, but I have been going out to, I have gone to every single district in SEPTA. I have gone to a few shops, talked to mechanics. I've been talking to our blockers, our cleaners. My goal is to co-create solution with our employees. And so I have to listen to what they're saying to me. And right now I'm in discovery mode. I've been in discovery mode since the last week of June. Each week I've visited either one or two different locations. Sometimes I'm there at 5 in the morning. Sometimes I'm there at 7 in the evening. And so until I have gotten to every single space that we occupy, I can't answer that question yet, because I'm getting so many different types of feedback that will create what this assistance looks like for our employees. And it's so important. And so until I feel like I've heard enough voices and I continue to tell them, whenever you got to get to me, or if I have to get to you, we will come up with something. But this is definitely something we're looking at and thinking about. And I've heard it time and time again that this is a difficult job to have as a new mother, as a mother of young children. And so we care about that, and we want to do something that helps, as many people as we can. And so I'm going to be data collecting for a minute until we can figure that out. But in the meantime, we are having the conversations with childcare providers to see what we can work out, and our benefits department.
Stephanie, any thoughts on that one?
I would just add, I think we have a unique opportunity. The pandemic has been such a disruption, and there's so many negative aspects to the pandemic. But one of the positive is recognizing the importance of our people, and it's strengthened our relationship with our labor partners. And it's given us an opportunity, particularly with the labor shortage that we all were experiencing, to really go back to basics, to understand what makes the job more attractive. And that's an opportunity to actually introduce more awareness about equity, gender equity, and what's going to make the jobs more attractive. So that's an opportunity as we continue to work with our labor partners, and we're at the negotiating table, to really help them understand the impacts of some of these rules and how do we modernize them so that they're more accessible to everyone.
Yeah, I think the labor partnership is particularly important. DOT had a panel sometime in the last year with members of the construction industry. And one of the women who participated in that panel talked about how important the daycare provisions that her union provided were to her in being able to work the hours required for construction. So I think can't emphasize that partnership too much. So another fairly general but really important question: what have been some of the challenges you faced in engaging and gaining trust of communities in the project planning process? That could go to either or both of you.
I would say again that we sometimes transportation authorities and DOTs and all that, we seem to have a reputation for coming in with an answer as opposed to coming in with a question. And so if that has been perpetuated for generations, even when you come in with the question, there's skepticism because they think you already have the answer. So constant open communication is the only way to sort of convince a community that we didn't come in as the know-it-all, but we're coming in as the we don't know anything. So when we talk about cultural competence, I like to bring in cultural humility. If we come in with questions and not even well, I understand your community. No, I don't. I don't understand your community. I would like to understand your community. I'm humble enough to say, I understand who I am and how does that relate to who you are, and where can we create some synergy and some connection so that you do actually believe me and not come in as the professional, but come in as the human, right? So I would say that that's probably going to be something that we're going to continue to work through for a long time, because we have generations and we still have people living on earth who have seen and felt and heard things, and their families are living in those decisions. And so it's going to be important for us to, like Stephanie said, reimagine together. How can we make this a different narrative?
I think it's also why it's so important, Emanuela, you talked about this in your presentation and it's on our platform. The train and grow element is really about the mirror and training internally. So we really are better stewards. Just the institutions and industry has been so kind of siloed, and the assumption is we already know it and we're good government. And, it's humbling, right? When you're at a community meeting and people are yelling at you. And so it must mean, to Emanuela's point, we used to, I think, had the dad method, is it right? Decide and direct versus I think the mom acronym, which I'm gonna forget, but it's really to ask, right? And then develop, co-create. But that takes time because, as Emmanuel said, people have long memories, um, and they love their communities. And this is an opportunity for us to be a more effective public agency in engaging in community enrollment in this way. But it's about a training. It's training our own staff is really important. They have to unlearn behaviors.
And people do have long memories, and they tend to remember the things that didn't go well, not the things that did go well.
That's right.
Which is perfect, totally human. So this may be our last question. For mega projects, design, build, or similar are typically the go-to method of delivery and construction. Can you elaborate how the programs you've discussed are shaping procurement and delivery to ensure that decisions related to equity are made during policy planning and design and are not eroded during the construction phase? Basically, how can we ensure decisions during construction create the greatest value for the public good rather than simply being the lowest cost?
Yeah, I think that's why we've decided to also expand our focus on incorporating equity beyond the planning process to make sure it also carries through the construction process. Whether that's the evaluation criteria and who we're going to partner with on the private sector side to really make sure that we don't only deliver a safe, affordable project, but one that keeps the commitments that were made during the planning process with the community. It's very important. What we have done also internally is while we are planning these projects, we actually have our project managers on the capital side embedded in the planning side, right? So that they understand what are the commitments with the community, what type of enrollment is going on, why are the decisions being made this way? So when our planning department formally hands off to the program management department, our capital projects department, they're not getting it fresh. They're embedded, and many of these projects, as you know, take years. And that is truly been transformational because it removes kind of this barrier that's automatically created when you hand something or flip something over the wall to another department and they've had no engagement in prior. So I think that's one of our best practices to get that early buy-in, early engagement by the anticipated construction project managers so they really understand the intent, and then they are held accountable for making sure that intent is actually realized during the construction phase, regardless of the delivery method, whether it's design to build, or progressive design build.
That's a great answer. And I've gotten so engaged in listening to you two that I've lost track of the time. So I'm going to need to cut us off at this point. Thank you both so much for really engaging on these issues. And thank you for contributing to this important conversation about embedding equity in project delivery. We have some great questions that we were not able to get to today, but we will use them to inform the material that we're posting to our project delivery website. I hope that everyone can join us for our next event, which will be Wednesday, September 27th, also at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The session will focus on using NEPA review to define and shape better projects. Featured speakers will include Nancy Daubenberger from Minnesota, the Minnesota Transportation Commissioner, Cami Horn, Senior Vice President of Development at Via Metropolitan Transit in San Antonio, Emily Biondi, Associate Administrator for Planning, Environment, and Realty at Federal Highway, and Megan Bloom, head of the Office of Environmental Protection at the Federal Transit Administration. So thank you all for joining us today. Please take a minute and provide us some quick feedback. At the end of the event, there'll be a few pop-up questions, and we greatly appreciate your input. And if you have any thoughts about what we can be doing that will provide you with tools in the project delivery area, please reach out at any time. And again, thank you, Emmanuel and Stephanie, for just terrific presentations. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, you too.